Hariom, pessoal, boas-vindas ao 14º episódio do Yoga para Você podcast. Meu nome é Luciana Prakash e hoje nós vamos bater um papo muito interessante com Jivana Heyman. Jivana é um colega nosso de caminhada, de jornada aí no yoga. Ele é fundador e diretor do Accessible Yoga Association, que é uma organização internacional sem fins lucrativos, dedicada a tornar os ensinamentos do yoga cada vez mais acessíveis. Ele se especializou em yoga para pessoas com necessidades especiais. E isso foi crescendo, começou ali com práticas de asana, né, posturas físicas, adaptadas para todo tipo de corpo, para todo tipo de necessidade, mas foi crescendo e acabou se tornando, na verdade, um grande movimento, esse movimento do yoga, do Accessible Yoga, ou tradução livre, yoga acessível, e hoje em dia abrange aí as mais diversas realidades e necessidades. Então, é um trabalho muito legal que ele tem. Ele esteve aqui no Brasil em 2015, ele veio dar o primeiro curso de formação para professores de yoga acessível ou Accessible Yoga, aqui no Jai Vida, que é a escola física onde eu e o Mitra trabalhamos. Eu sou uma das sócias também, a gente dá aula presencial lá, e foi muito legal quando ele veio, porque ele trouxe vários questionamentos, várias ideias inovadoras. O yoga, a princípio, ele é para todos, deveria ser sempre para todos, deveria ser sempre acessível, mas a gente vive aí um contexto, às vezes, bem diferente, relacionado, né, à realidade, da aplicabilidade do yoga. Então, ele trouxe algumas informações muito interessantes e, recentemente, ele tem 2 livros. Um, que já é um pouco mais antigo, mais ou menos aí dessa época, de 2014, 2015, por aí, chamado Accessible Yoga, Poses and Practices for Everybody. Tradução livre, yoga acessível, posturas e práticas para todo o corpo. E, recentemente, agora, no inicinho de dezembro, ele lançou um segundo livro chamado Yoga Revolution, Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion. Revolução do Yoga, a construção de uma prática de coragem e compaixão. Então, espero que vocês gostem desse nosso convidado tão especial e que a nossa conversa seja útil e edificante para cada um de vocês. Namastê. Hi, Jivana. Thank you very much for being here at the Yoga para Você podcast. It's a pleasure to receive you here and to hear from you, talking to our community about yoga, this issue that we both love so much. Thanks for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Thanks, Prakash. Thanks for having me and for all you do. I love talking to you and being a part of your community. I got to visit you many years ago there in Brazil, and it was wonderful. You have such a great Sangha there. So I'm glad to connect.
Yes, I checked the date. Everybody.
Huh?
I checked the dates. You were here in April 2015. Can you believe?
Wow.
It's been so long.
That's a long time. But hello to everyone there. Hello.
Well, as I told you guys at the beginning of this podcast, Jivana has launched a new book called Yoga Revolution, Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion. And Jivana, I have to tell you that when I read the title of your book, I got really excited, because I thought this couldn't be, there couldn't exist a better moment regarding everything that's going on in the world and, you know, everything that we are all going through, to talk about Yoga Revolution. But then, and right away, I started like imagining all that you could be envisioning for this yoga revolution, maybe this new version of a modern yoga. But then I heard your podcast, and it beautifully explained that that's not exactly what you mean, right? It's not about doing a revolution of yoga, but in us. And it just made so much sense to me because, of course, maybe there's nothing to change in yoga, but in the way we understand, in the way we put it into practice. And once we do that, maybe a lot of things will naturally change, right?
Exactly.
But
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, so exactly. That's exactly what I had in mind. I think yoga is not, yoga is fine. Like yoga itself is, thousands and thousands of years old, and the teachings have lasted for so long because they're so powerful and transformative. But I think the way we're teaching in the West, especially modern yoga, needs to change. And in particular, what I'm getting at with Yoga Revolution is actually the point that yoga is revolutionary by nature. Like the heart of the practice is completely different than the way we think in the West. The way we tend to focus on getting things, and achievement, and getting money and power and all that stuff. Yoga is really about going inside and connecting with ourself, and that's completely opposite of what we're normally taught to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, and it made sense to me. I think I've been noticing in myself recently a very strong agitation towards yoga, questioning some of the things that I never questioned before. I don't know how was it for you, but for me, when I started practicing yoga, it was just this amazing tool, this amazing opportunity to just become a completely different person, as in like coming from a place of a not really perfect person, not good enough, like a lack, as if something was lacking in this person. And then now with yoga, I would just transform myself. And after, I don't know, years of practice, I would just be this amazing human being. And still, I do believe in the power of yoga and in the possibility of so much transformation, but that's not really the point. Now I get it. I see it very differently now. I mean, it's not about just transforming this human being that I am into something completely different that was not there before, and it's not good enough. It's really about connecting with ourselves and embracing our humanity, our imperfection, recognizing that we are perfect with our imperfections, right? And then with all of that, a lot of questioning about yoga arose with this. I mean, I see the agitation, and but it makes sense to me that it's about me. It's about the way I understand and how I can put it into practice, and how this different way of dealing with yoga, understanding and applying yoga, is what's going to make the difference, and not any change in yoga itself.
Yes, I mean, I think that's so important what you're saying, that what the confusion that comes, I think, is that we tend to think that yoga is going, like you said, going to change us into some perfected being. And I think there's two ideal images we have in our mind. One is an ideal physical being, like that yoga will make us young forever, perfectly healthy, I don't know what, And then this other idea that comes, I think it's a more traditional idea, but still not quite right, is that yoga means we'll be enlightened, that we'll go off into a cave and leave the world and just have this transcendent experience that is spiritual awakening, that is somehow separate from our lives. And I think both of those are very extreme and don't, and there is a tradition of both of those within yoga, but yoga is so much more. Like there's a lot more there. And I think most of us aren't monks these days. We're practicing as householders. And I think we need to find a way to integrate our real world experience of, being in the world, having families, having business and jobs and friends and community and like how we relate to others. And that needs to become an extension of our inner practice. And so in the book, my dog is barking, but in my book, I talk about inner revolution being that changing the relationship with ourself, and not in a way that denies ourself, but in creating more of a, peace between our heart and our mind, which are often at war inside, like that inner battle that we're fighting, or it's like in the Gita, right? The inner battle. But that's the transformation of yoga, is like finding peace in yourself. And then the outer revolution is, what do you do with that? What do you do with the energy and the peace that you find in all of that practice that you do? How does that change the way you walk in the world and act? And I think that's the point of the practice. Otherwise, it's quite selfish if it's just about you. If it's just about getting healthier or happier or stronger. I mean, that's great. But to me, I want to be of use in the world. You know, I want to make some, I want to connect. I don't know if I want to make change. I wouldn't say that, but I want to connect with others and find a way of expressing what I find in myself. And I think that's where service and karma yoga comes in. So I guess the book really is simply about connecting with ourselves and then also practicing service, however that looks for each of us. If that makes sense.
Yeah, you mentioned the word enlightenment.
Yeah.
This is a word that has always kind of like, it always kind of like bugged me somehow, you know, it bothered me somehow, because enlightenment, what for and when? And I mean, it's something that when you read some scriptures and when you understand the yoga teachings in a way very focused on enlightenment, something in the future that maybe if you practice really, really hard, you will get there someday. But what about now, right? Yeah. What about the now that is also so important in yoga? And also, and this is very personal, but I remember when I started dating Mitra, he had a very, very strong practice, beautiful practice. And it was really nice to see it, you know, but it kind of like was like, it was different. It was also difficult to see because he had a lot of discipline and hours of practice, of personal practice. And I remember talking to him like, how can we think of having family, for example? This is not going to work when in the context of kids to have breakfast, take showers, go to school and prepare lunch and clean the house and work and bring money in. It just doesn't really apply. And I think one of the big changes that we saw in our relationship was exactly that, was how we were managing, where we just became more able to get all those teachings and put it into practice within our family, within our house, considering all the needs of a household context, right?
Exactly.
And then, of course, that's the only thing that made possible for us to stay together. But this is really nice.
Yeah, he's still practicing that way. I would just say that, like, that's service, you know, that's karma yoga. So I don't think his practice has stopped. It's just changed. And yours too, right? Like, I know being a parent was the most intensive practice I've had. You know, it's easy to go sit in meditation, or well, not easy, but whatever. It's easier than actually taking care of a child or dealing with a teenager. It's like, that's serious, you know, and I see people doing it all the time. Like, there's so many people in the world doing service in their lives through their work or through their family, really loving and caring for people. And I think that's yoga. And I don't think we lift them up enough. And I think we have a very limited idea of what yoga is. We've divorced it from our lives in many ways.
Yeah. And I remember a lot of times just feeling so bad, because when I started practicing yoga, I already had Livia, my older daughter, and I just had to do all the other stuff. I couldn't dedicate as much time to personal practice as I would love to. And I remember a lot of times like really feeling bad and guilty about that until I finally understood that that's not what yoga is about. It is about serving. And one friend that you and I have in common, Swami Ramananda, was like one of the best teachers for that. He really made me understand that yoga is about service, and not only service out there in community, in society, but also in your family. It starts here in your immediate surroundings, and then if it's possible, if you actually can, then it grows and develops and spreads, but it begins here.
Yes,
right, within this context.
I think the reason is that, yoga is really about understanding the way our mind works and our ego. And so what happens in situations where we're being of service, really being of service, means we have to get over ourselves. We have to be able to think of the other, think of another being, another person, and care for them enough to put their needs at least equal to ours. And I think that's how we learn to control ourselves, to work with our mind. It's not through criticizing our mind or being negative about the way the mind works, but just having an understanding that when we can kind of get over ourselves, then we are really there for others. And then we find more joy. We experience love. We experience connection. So actually, that's how karma yoga works. It actually gives us joy when we can be there in connection. The other thing, though, I just want to say that this all comes out of, for me, is the idea of power and the nature of power in yoga practice, because I feel like, how do I say this? I think yoga has been used in a way to fit into capitalism, and a lot of lineages have abuse in them. There's a lot of abuse in yoga. And I think all of that comes out of the fact that yoga students are basically being told that you still don't have enough. Like, you still need to learn from me, or you still need to do this or that. And I think that's just not in alignment with the teachings. The teachings of yoga are very clear that we have what we need inside, that each of us is equal in spirit, even though our lived experience is different, right? Like, our body and mind is an aspect of nature, and our nature is all different, but our spirit, the Purusha, is the same in each of us. And it's just through yoga and other kinds of spiritual practice that we can connect inwards with that. That's the source of all joy and happiness. So to me, it's important that we understand that everyone everywhere has the same capacity for that. It doesn't matter if you call yourself a yoga practitioner or not. It doesn't matter how much time you have to spend in your practice or not. You still have the same capacity. It doesn't matter if you have a traditional lineage or not. It makes no difference. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is an opportunity for everyone to work on themselves. And I just think that, to me, is a very kind of a radical idea. And to me, that's, my background is in activism. And I would say that's the basis of social justice to me, is understanding that we all have equal access to power. And often power in society is seen as an external thing. And what I love about yoga is it changes that around and says it's actually inside of us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. It bothers me a lot to see how much the spiritual paths in general, not only yoga, but how much spiritual teachings are used in a completely distorted way to justify some big mistakes practiced by human beings, right? And it's been one of the things that's mostly really bothering me lately, and it's something that became very big and personal to me. I would love to see, in that sense, in that way, some revolution, some way to stop all this spiritual bypassing, this misuse of spiritual teachings to keep justifying just really bad behaviors. And but I don't know. I don't even know how can we.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to say in this book. I talk about that directly in the book. I talk about my experience with Swami Satchidananda and the struggle I have trying to understand my relationship with him, considering that he was abusive, but also feeling like, you know, gratitude for the teachings that I've learned from him. Mm-hmm. And how I'm still struggling with that. I share that clearly in the book, but I think to me, it goes back to the basic concept that I'm trying to share, which is that I think that yoga is a very empowering practice. It's not that it gives us power, it just connects us back to what we already have. And I feel like that's how it changes, I think, for people to start realizing that they have it all along. I mean, it sounds kind of a cliche, you know, but that's what yoga offers. Yoga offers tools to connect back to the source of your own power. And I actually think all spirituality does. Like, I don't think yoga, I mean, yoga is unique in many ways, but I feel like this is the nature of spirituality, but that spiritual teachings are very often used to manipulate people because they're so powerful, because they can be so transformative. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of religion has been used that way. Not all, but a lot. I know as a queer person that I've always been afraid of religion because I feel like I was being criticized or told I'm going to hell. And so yoga was transformative and life-saving for me because it didn't offer that same judgmental attitude. And it offered me practices that showed me how to connect inward, very direct practices. I mean, yoga is so powerful. Like, and I mean, asana too, even though asana is often taught in a way that is too competitive, right? Too focused on achievement outwardly, I think it is incredibly powerful in terms of connecting with yourself inwardly. So pranayama, meditation, all the ethical teachings and the philosophy of yoga, it's incredible. The tools that we have at our disposal to make that connection and have it transform the way we think of ourselves. And I think that will change the way we are in the world, including keeping us more conscious when we enter into relationships that might be abusive. Like, my hope would be that if you have some consciousness around your own potential as a person, that you're less likely to allow other people to mistreat you. I mean, it happens, like bad things happen to good people. I'm not saying that's not true, but I think sometimes inner work can protect you in a sense.
Yeah. And on the other hand, I've also seen so many times this lack, maybe the lack of self-confidence, this understanding that I'm not good enough, that I need something different, that I need to become someone else, a better version of myself, a better person in the future, ends up giving even more space and more kind of like permission for people to abuse. Right? Because you already put yourself in this fragile, let's say, or you are made fragile for some reason or whatever. And as you see yourself like that, as a human being that's lacking something, then it makes you even more vulnerable to really mostly anything.
And it's not true. I mean, according to the teachings, you're not lacking anything. And there's nothing wrong with you. Like, yoga is not about saying that you need to achieve something or get anything. And that's also why I don't like the idea of enlightenment as the goal, because I think the fact is that we have that spirit within us already. It's not gone anywhere. It's just we forget or we ignore it sometimes, or we also just struggle because I think, like you said, like some people feel insecure, like me. I'm definitely insecure, and I've struggled with that, and I share that in the book. I talk about how I've had to learn to embrace failure, and I have a chapter on that in the book. And like, this idea of failure, I think, is very important, because I agree that certain people tend to be more self-critical and then might be more vulnerable to be abused or taken advantage of. And I think for people like that, it's really important to allow yoga to build you up So this kind of, I think it's a subtle thing because I think it depends on your personality and also your positionality. That word, I don't know if you know the word positionality, but like meaning like what is your position culturally? Like, are you experiencing racism, homophobia, transphobia? Have you had or ableism or ageism? You know, have you had trauma? And like based on all of those factors, you might be more sensitive and kind of self-critical person. And then yoga needs to be used to build you up and give you power. And that's service. Like yoga service can also be towards yourself. And we call that self-care. It's still service. But that's to build up someone who's been struggling. If that's how you feel, then that's how you use yoga. Take care of yourself. If you feel like you have power, if you feel like I am strong and I have all this energy, then you don't need yoga more. You need to build you up. You need yoga to serve others. So then you shift your focus externally. And I talk about that in the book, about how you really need to use yoga to examine yourself and see, you know, where, and it can change every day. Like, where am I today? Do I need to focus on caring for myself, or can I focus on serving? And it could be the same. It could be the same thing. But I think that's important because those of us that are insecure need to really spend time loving ourselves in a new way. And part of what I like I said earlier, I talk about failure as a practice. And my idea is that I'm trying to frame failure as part of my yoga journey. And that's how I learn, right? I learn when I make a mistake, and that it's okay. It's okay to make a mistake. It's not the end of the world. And I say sometimes it's like every time I go to meditate and my mind wanders, it's like I failed at meditation. But that's good, because then I realize, oh, I'm not meditating. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the benefit of these mistakes, is it can show you a place where you can still do some work. You can still care for yourself. And I think one of the challenges I see in the West is how we use yoga to care for ourselves and love ourselves rather than to change. I think that's what you were getting at before, rather than to try to mold us into something else, just to love who we are now.
Yeah, exactly. A few years back, I'm not sure when, but I remember when I was struggling already with the concept of enlightenment, I heard from a very famous teacher here in Brazil. He's actually from Uruguay, but he's famous here and now in Portugal anyway. His name is Pedro Kupfer. And he gave a definition of enlightenment that really thrilled me and just made me start believing in enlightenment again. Not that enlightenment there somewhere in the future when I become this perfect person, but now. He said that enlightenment is every little moment that you that you have just a new understanding of what's going on inside of you, that you just have an opportunity to see what's going on inside of you. Sorry. And maybe seeing the world and yourself in a different perspective. He said something like, every time you throw light within your internal processes, and by light, I understood he meant understanding. So accepting, embracing, this was such a good relief for me. And that's when I started looking at yoga as something not to change this whole me, but really embracing and loving myself, accepting myself the way I am. And with that, maybe doing the work that I need to do inside, because I understand that's also important. Otherwise, we would just not be doing any of it.
Exactly. I mean, I just want to say that's the part that gets confusing. And I want to clarify that, what I was saying, because it's not just loving yourself the way you are, but it's also having clarity about that and beginning to understand your own ego. And I feel like that's where I get stuck. It's not that ego's bad, but it's like looking at the part of your mind that wants to be fulfilled from outside, right? Through achieving something or getting something or controlling other people. And I think that's what yoga is about. And what Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutras clearly is like, he says, quieting the mind is yoga, but I think it has more to do with like, to me, it's like harnessing the power of the mind for the purpose of your spirit. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it has to do with integration. So that if you think of spirit as your true self, as like the observer, we tend to separate that from ego mind, like that's a bad child that we're going to control. And I think this is a very dangerous situation to set up, because like my bad child will continue to act out all the time. Like that's what I do. So I think it's more of what I'm trying to say is you work with the mind, but in a loving way. That's all I'm saying. So working with the ego and the mind, but with kindness, and just say like, oh, I see you. I see what you're doing. Like, again, you're trying to get this person to acknowledge you. Again, you want someone to say something nice. You think if you get that job, you'll be happy. You think if you get money, you'll be happy. And it's like, in a way, I think you will get a little happiness from that, because joy is, I should say, fun is found in the world. Like the world is fun and pleasurable. Like, I don't want to deny that, but it's just like, remember, I have to remind my mind that actually those things are also painful. So the things that I'm looking to get from outside will also bring me pain, and I will suffer from them. And when I do have pain, I think, oh, here I go again. But I try to just do it kinder. I don't know. That's all I'm saying. Like, to do it with kindness. So there isn't this sense of this battle again inside, but actually more of like a loving relationship between the heart and the mind, where we can care for ourselves, and not in a way, not just to, I don't know how to say it, to see clearly, but in a loving, kind way.
Yeah, I totally agree. The loving kindness was just really something that transformed my way of dealing with yoga and with dealing with myself. It was really an amazing tool. And that's it. It really transformed my relationship with yoga and with myself and with others. I often hear people say to me like, oh, you're so much more flexible nowadays. I get that all the time, HIV. This is something
you don't mean physically flexible. You mean mentally.
No. I understand it's like more accepting to things the way they are, people the way they are, because I remember when I started working at Ayurveda back in 2013, I had this very strict vision of yoga, especially because in Ayurveda we follow a path, we follow the integral yoga. So it had to be all within those limits and boxes of integral yoga, or of whatever I thought was yoga or integral yoga. And I just really changed along the way, because I started being more accepting towards myself and more flexible with myself, with my mind, more flexible, not the body. Also the body, of course.
But no, I love that. I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at, is that if you can connect inward, that allows you to connect with others too. And not, if you're criticizing your own mind all the time, thinking, oh, I'm so stupid or whatever, how are you treating others? Like I say things to myself that I would never say to other people, but I've tried to really watch that. That's my practice. It's like, how am I talking to myself? And then how does that change the way I see the world? And so if we all could embrace everyone for the way they are, you know what I mean? We don't need to accept harm, but I think to embrace difference, I think that's where we can have the activist piece that I'm talking about. So where this fits into social justice for me is exactly what you said. The flexibility that you found allows you to accept other people. Maybe they do maybe for someone who is trained that it's wrong to be gay or queer, But if they start to open their mind to become more flexible in their mind, then they think, oh, wow, they can be however they want. So it's like, that's how we create a just society, is by having everyone considered to be equal and to have equal access to all the resources that are provided, to have respect, to be able to have justice. These are the things that come when we treat others in a respectful way. But it begins personally, it begins internally. And what I'm interested in, to really sum it up, I would say, this whole book to me is the idea that how is spiritual practice related to the way we show up in the world?
Got it.
You know?
Got it. And is there a way that you envision this? How do we put that into practice? What would you expect to see in practice out there regarding a yoga revolution?
Like, I would love to think that, you know, people that are already practicing yoga are doing this. And I think many are. I think many people who will read my book will think, oh yeah, this is how I think. And I'm so happy for that. But I think there's a lot of people doing yoga that don't think about this part. They don't think about yoga ethics, yoga philosophy, and karma yoga. That's not part of their background or training, or they weren't interested in that. And they're using yoga simply for fun or exercise or whatever. And that's okay. But what I would hope is people would use the practice to be reflective and look at themselves and think about the way they talk to themselves inside, and then the way that changes their relationship with others. That's what I hope. I hope that people can just take that next step to reflect on, like, how am I seeing myself and the world? Because that's what yoga is really for.
Yeah, I totally agree. You mentioned something. You mentioned the ethics, right? I always talk to my students, especially within the context of teacher trainings, but I always remind them all the time that it's not like by accident, let's say, that yamas and niyamas are right there as the first 2 steps of the 8 steps of yoga, right? Of Raja Yoga. And there must be a bigger message about that. Why is it there right at the beginning? And my understanding of it is that none of the other steps of yoga, I'm calling it steps because I can't remember how it's called.
Limbs. Huh? The limbs.
Limbs, exactly. Thank you. In English, it's limbs. So the other limbs will not work well without this strong foundation on ethics, on yamas and niyamas. And I remember when I first started studying them, it seems, especially in the context of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, sometimes when I started studying, it felt like really far away, or either too easy, let's say, ahimsa, non-violence. Okay, I don't hit people usually out there on the streets. I've never killed anyone, so I'm doing very good, right? I am a good ahimsa practitioner, but then I started going deeper and deeper and deeper and understanding more that they are actually very, very hard to achieve. And I became more interested, not really in the philosophy of it, but how to actually put that in practice. How can I practice nonviolence? How can I actually practice satya, truthfulness? How can I apply that in the context of my family, of my life, of my community? And that made a big difference. And I think it gave me more strength to talk to my students about this as an important foundation. There's no, the other limbs just will not work well without that foundation, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's exactly what I talk about in the book. So you're already ahead of me. Yeah, I talk about that a lot. I don't think you can have yoga without ethics. I think it becomes something else.
Yeah.
You know, I think without yama niyama, especially yama, I think without yama in particular, then you're not doing yoga. You're simply doing exercise or some kind of self-help thing, right? Maybe you're doing self-help program, and that's fine. That's okay. But I mean, if you want it to be called yoga, I think it has to include ahimsa first. And that's not, and I think what you said, I would say it even more strongly, that not only will it not work, if you're not practicing ahimsa, it'll actually cause harm. So there's a way. And the problem is we don't always see how. And I know that I probably cause harm in ways that I'm unaware of. So I'm not saying we need to be perfect, but we need to be consciously working on it and to think about how does our action affect others. And one way that I think about it is that ahimsa is a negative, right? Non-violence. But what is the opposite of violence? And I think that's to care for others. And the word I use is compassion. So to me, that's the subtitle of my book, like building a practice of courage and compassion. I'm actually speaking directly about ahimsa, that the idea is how do you build a practice based on that idea, actually? And I think maybe that's the most important idea in yoga, is this idea of ahimsa, which is interesting because traditionally, when we look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there's a very little conversation about our relationships with others. It's always talked about it's an inner practice. And I know that the traditional translators always say it's about going inside, and that's fine. But I just want to say that personally, as a householder, as a parent, as someone who's in the world, I can't help but see the endless opportunities to practice ahimsa that arise in my life. And I see that becomes almost the heart of my practice. I also would say about ahimsa that, and I share about this in the book, that, you know, Gandhi, who's an interesting figure, but Gandhi led a movement based on ahimsa and satya. He called it satyagraha, which he called satya meaning truth, the force of truth. But he said that truth is also love. And he said that his work was about the force of love. And he basically led an actual revolution in India by overturning the colonial government, the colonial British government, using the yoga teachings. And he then inspired Martin Luther King, who led the civil rights movement based on those same concepts. The whole idea of nonviolent revolution comes out of yoga. He also inspired Nelson Mandela, who led a revolution in South Africa. And I think that we can see that these teachings have always been used as in a revolutionary way. And I'm not saying just politically, but I mean in terms of offering people access to inner power through ethics, which to me, ethics is literally like the way we act towards each other, right? Like the way I treat you, the way I respect you or not, that's what ethics are. Sometimes ethics seems like it's this external idea, but it's very much to me like real world, like, am I respecting your boundaries? Are you respecting mine? Like that's what ethics is to me. And I'll just say one more thing about it, that Patanjali says, if you look just at the sutras, he says more strongly, and I think than anything else, there's a sutra that says that these are the universal teachings, the ethics for all time and all places. And I think that's pretty powerful to say. You know?
Yeah, I agree. Oh, well, that's amazing, Jivana. Thank you so much for talking to us. I love this conversation, and I really hope it brings insight to people all over so that maybe they can understand their own processes better and just maybe make a difference in society or in their family context. I mean, I just really hope it can inspire people.
I hope so too. I hope we can use yoga to help us find some peace so that we can cause less harm in the world, right? That's where to start. So anyway, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Great to see you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good to see you too.
Bom, pessoal, então é isso. Muito obrigada pela presença, pela participação aqui com a gente e espero do coração, como eu falei lá no início desse podcast, eu espero que essa conversa seja edificante para vocês, que traga insights, que traga novas perspectivas, novas formas de compreender e aplicar o yoga no dia a dia. Namastê e até o próximo. Om Shanti.